Hello and welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you here today for the next in our series, Day One and Beyond, which is taking you through a series of topics and activities related to building out on Oracle Cloud. For those of you who might be new to these events, we're hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle community forum for end users. And I'll be sharing some resources with you today that lead you back to that forum. If you are not already a member, you can create a free account and join in discussions, post questions, look for upcoming events, and all sorts of things like that. My name is Kenna Kettrick. I'm a program manager with the OCI Go-to-Market team. And today I'm joined by our usual Day One and Beyond team of Jeremy Walker, Master Principal Cloud Architect, and Larry Beausoleil, Cloud Engineering Senior Enablement Manager, to take us through how to use our Architecture Center and deploy our reference architectures that we have available as resources. All right, Larry and Jeremy, floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Kenna. Yeah, this is going to be an exciting topic. I'm going to go straight into answering one of the questions here that we got from the Q&A. When is the next series starting on these topics? So we were actually just discussing that. So we will be putting together a new lineup and get that posted out to everybody. I think for next, probably starting in June, July-ish time frame. So we'll be getting some more of this out to you. So this is exciting. Well, welcome everybody to Day One and Beyond. Today we're going to talk about deploying reference architectures, and this is something that is very much a build upon everything that we've learned in the general quick starts portion of Day One and Beyond, and some of the advanced talks that we've had. And today, Jeremy, are you excited for this topic? Because I know I am. I'm looking forward to learning about how to do the overall design, where it's at, and how to deploy it.
Yes, yes, I am. I know, and I usually say that I'm excited about these topics, and I guess it's just because I am excited about this cloud and technology in general. But today it is a kind of build on, take what we've learned type talk that we're going to be having. We have referred to that reference center, our OCI reference center that has reference architectures for many different technologies, our products, offerings, best practices, and we've shown a few of those here. We've gone over them. I think we'll touch into it a little bit later, just showing the interface. But what we really want to do is be able to take those and learn from them and apply them to our own use cases. We provide best frameworks for a general, a general build out for products, offerings, architectures. But when it comes down to deploying it within your data center, within your use case, you really need to take those and be able to build out your own reference architecture internally for your own use, into your own workflows, for your own scenarios. And that's what we're really going to go into today, how to take what's been suggested, put out there by Oracle's best minds and architects, and take that and apply that to your use case. And so I think that's going to be fun, because that's something where you really get to take the different puzzle pieces and put them together and build out that full picture.
Yeah, and right now what I have showing is the overall design we're going to discuss today, and we're going to bring in some best practices as we go through this, and we'll hop into the architecture center to talk about deploying the architectures and what that looks like. Some of the things to consider as we go through this, I mean, having a reference architecture, I don't know about you, Jeremy, but I mean, I like having it. You know, I think about the idea of if you were to build a house, and building on the cloud, and I think building a house can go hand in hand. And this is where we're going to talk about this blueprint that we have in front of us. And when we're looking at reference architectures, it is really a blueprint, because we have the overall design of the compartment structure, the security that needs to be implemented, the different VCNs that we're using here, the different services, and how they all connect. But I know when we were kind of preparing for this, one of the things you brought up is, well, we have the overall design, but what about the intricacies, and what about the other parts that are involved in this? So, building a house, you need a plumber and an electrician. And I think you were talking about like schematics and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get into that today, I think, from
Yeah,
my
exactly.
side. I'm, you know,
Yeah, and yeah, I was going in that, and it's something where you can really, if done correctly, this can really make going building into the cloud and operating in the cloud much easier. Yeah, you and I were going back and forth. I'm in the process of building a house. You're in the process of moving as well, and going through that same aspect of dealing with contractors and seeing what you said, blueprints. I think that's a perfect example, because within those blueprints you have you have the full picture like what we're looking at here, but within a true set of blueprints, you'll have schematics for wiring, you'll have schematics for the plumbing, you'll have schematics for the frameworks for your framers and your engineers. And each one of those teams has to work together and get the information they need to build the final product. It's the exact same way here. You'll have network diagrams, you'll have security diagrams, and I use the word schematics, the same concept. And then you'll have infrastructure, which is your framing. And you'll have different teams in most cases, in most enterprise use cases, you'll have different teams collaborating to build this final product. And you have to have a good set of blueprints to build from, because, and it's something, again, you and I mentioned earlier, is the whole benefit of the cloud is repeatability, auditability, and scalability. And so having these blueprints, being able to build from them, audit them, and then hand them across to different teams within the organization is not just useful. I would say it's required for scalable operating in the cloud.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's kind of dig into this a little bit more about this architecture. You know, we have a lot of components, and we're going to work through them as we move through the slides. Couple of questions that just popped up. So, are there Terraform predefined or pre-detained templates like they're in the Azure CAF? Yeah, we do have predefined Terraform templates. And we do have some templates, and we'll get into the architecture center here shortly to kind of talk through some of those. I just wanted to, we're going to start with walking through this particular architecture, and then we'll hop into the architecture center and a couple other locations. The other item here is there a checklist somewhere for what OCI asks customers before designing landing architectures? So I think we have some white papers on it, and that's something that I'll have to get back to you on where some of the like white papers or where some of the pages are that say, hey, this is the architecture, here are the questions you should ask. And that is part of our cloud adoption framework of types of questions you should be asking. From a checklist piece, I think this kind of goes to where I built this architecture, this slide deck for, and that's going to be pointing to our built and deployed series. And so that has a lot of like tutorials and checklists of things you have to consider along the way. And I'll pull that page up as we kind of progress through this. So what we have here is we have the network layer. And this is one of the first layers that I wanted to start with, because I know we've talked about this piece in the past. We've had a couple networking in our Day One and Beyond series. We've had some experts come in and talk about it. But this is one of the core pieces when you start building out your reference architecture and understanding of how things are going to connect, because you have to understand where things are pointing to. What are you going to use? Are we doing a VPN day one? Are we doing Fast Connect day one? What are we using to connect our infrastructure on-prem? Are we doing migration? So these are all things when we start talking about building out our architecture. And I have a couple bullet points on here. You can attach one or more Fast Connect virtual circuits to your DRG to connect to on-premises networks. And this is something that what do I need to build out to be able to do this? And what's the timeline for building this out? And so this is why we need the blueprint. This is one of the core functionalities of let's plan what we're doing for application, we figure out the timeline, and then we implement it. And this is where talking about the CAF, are we ready to do, cloud? And that's as we look at this, what's the VCN look like? What's our network? Are we going to be overlapping from on-prem? Because we don't want that issue.
Yeah, and one thing I would put in here is when we talk about reference architectures that are provided by Oracle or even third parties, a lot of times this first step is kind of taken for granted. There's not any guidance here. There's an assumption that you have a connection, an external connection. There's an assumption that there's CIDR ranges that are non-overlapping that communicate. When you're building this for yourself and deploying it yourself, again, going to this core, like Larry said, this fundamental first step is making sure that all these steps are documented and established, one for growth, and also so they mesh across your enterprise as you build this out and as you expand.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one of the things I didn't kind of highlight here of how to actually build this, and we'll talk about how this architecture is built later, what icons you can use to make sure that it's accurate, and what tools you can use, because there are a few tools to kind of build this out. So, but we got our networking layer. We're continuing on the networking layer because there's a lot of components to this. Yeah. I'm going to throw out just a general piece. Does everybody remember what a VCN is? Anyone want to throw that real quick in the Q&A or in the Q&A? Throw in the Q&A what a VCN, why it's important to us in our build out, and what it helps us do. While we're waiting for the Q&A, Jeremy, what's your thoughts on it? Why is it important in this architecture?
Well, yeah, because in this particular architecture, as we look at this, we're starting to see something, we're getting more enterprise focused. In a typical enterprise, you have network segmentation, logical segmentation between applications, between networks, between cost centers. There's several ways that you want to divide up your application space, and VCNs, that virtual cloud network, gives you that tool in your toolbox to divide out not just your resources, but also your security, your usage, your scalability, and also your organization for interconnection and what resources can communicate to each other. Again, something that might be taken for granted in a standard reference architecture you get online. When you're building out your own, you need to know what's going into each of these sections, make it expandable, and make it so that you get the input from your network team and from your infrastructure team on how best to build this out to grow. And then again, from your application teams, what applications need to speak to each other between these different segments or these different business units.
Yeah, and when we're talking about deploying a reference architecture, so a couple of things. We're from my days of doing some development, you write that pseudocode, you're like, this is what I want it to do. This is kind of what we're doing here. We're writing what we want built out. And now each one of these pieces has to potentially be built out in a certain order. And so we have our VCNs, and this is something that we're building out first. Then we're building out some of these other components that attach to the VCN so that we know where the traffic is directed. And these components here, I know that there's asked about Terraform. That can build you a reference architecture using Terraform. So this is something that we can go from the Terraform to a reference architecture. It's a matter of what your background is. If you've done that, what's easy. And there are reference architectures that we have that have Terraform templates that you can start from, and then you can modify those. But if you modify those, then we get into the version control. We get into, are we making sure, hey, we removed this internet gateway from this architecture? We need to document that because I don't know about all of you. Nothing worse than going back and saying, okay, how does this architecture look now after being deployed for 3 years, 4 years, that type of situation. And does it still have an internet gateway? It's an easy find. I'm picking on something that we could tell pretty quickly if it has an internet gateway. And then we get into some of these other components. So a local peering gateway. So where, the traffic is coming from our VCN, and this is something that's directing from on-prem through Fast Connect, through a DRG, through a local peering gateway, and then into our VCNs. And so this is something that will really, like Jeremy, like you're talking about, really help us isolate our resources, help us understand where the traffic is flowing, and then where are we putting these components and why, and what are the potential other services that we need to connect to those. So, all right, we're adding some more components to our networking layer, and this is for this architecture. So this is something that, as I kind of talk through this, I'm not saying that this is a one size fits all. This is something that's very much a, what are you trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? And then you can take a look at our multiple reference architectures to deploy and say, this fits the starts of our needs. This is the start. So we have a 3-tier architecture, and we're trying to deploy maybe an e-commerce platform. And so we have a back-end buying system, and we have the front end that's going to host our website. So there's lots of different ways to actually design this. It just comes down to what are the compliances that have to be implemented. And Jeremy, when you're looking at architecture, are you putting in compliances? Because that's something that I personally like to do, is what compliances do we have to meet so I know what's going on here? Does this have to be encrypted? Does my data have to be encrypted in transit when we're talking about network? And that kind of goes from networking to security. So, there's a little bit of overlap there in some of these conversations when we're talking about the reference architecture and deploying it.
Yeah, definitely. And within this reference architecture, you need to be aware of what legal, what regulatory environment, regulatory guidelines you have to go by. I know I've worked a lot with energy and also with Fiserv companies. And with Fiserv, you have PCI compliance. With PCI, there's very strict guidelines about what data can be adjacent, be accessible, even be routable to and from within your network topography. Same thing with GDPR and information within the energy sector. Certain data cannot be accessible, routable, or even in sometimes the same physical location as other pieces of data. That needs to be stated in your reference architecture. It needs to be diagrammed out so that, again, as this is being passed across your organization, your CCOE is going over and approving this, or your cloud center of excellence is looking at this. It's clearly defined, and as it's being built out, it's clearly understood the intention, so that, again, when the auditors come through with your PCI, your auditors or your assessors are looking over this, they can clearly understand that these lines are encrypted, these routing rules are in place, and the implementers are also clear about that as well. So yes, it's something that needs to be thought of at day zero to really hit it home. Day zero, you need to be aware of what restrictions are in place to make sure that practically your data is safe, but also from a compliance and a regulatory environment perspective as well.
Yeah, and some of the icons that kind of you can use when you're looking at the reference architecture. And this is part of the reason why we wanted to walk through this before we hop into the architecture center is, you'll see if it just shows this, it's Fast Connect. If it shows this, it's dynamic routing gateway. Local peering gateway, you see the arrows going opposite directions. NAT gateway, it's just got an arrow coming in. It's something that knowing what these icons are help when you start making notes. Like, okay, this item here is a security list that's actually for the subnet. When we get into the other layers that build on top of this, we start getting into our other access control lists that we're gonna have for our specific resources. Maybe we have something in front of our load balancer, and all of this documentation. I know, I understand everybody, saying like, hey, this takes a long time to document this, but the time you take to document this in your reference architecture will save you time down the road, because it's much easier to go back. And that's something that guarantee everybody on this call is like, yep, we know this, we got this, we're experts on it. but it's just something that I like to highlight as we talk through this, because these, like, the reason this is broken out is because we wanted multiple layers. So the networking team knows, okay, this is what I got to focus on. And so we add some of these pieces of like private subnets. Where are we putting these components so that they know every single piece or resource in the cloud that they have to worry about? Because on-prem, when I deploy a server, I got a networking team, but in the cloud, when you start deploying these services, it expands some of the resources that you have to interact with. And so you just have to be aware of, okay, where are they at? And this is in a specific availability domain that we're talking about here, but what about the compartment? Where are those resources and who has access to those resources? And so this goes into some of our security talks that we've had and some of the other conversations we've had on this channel. Any items to add there, Jeremy?
Yeah. No, you stated it really well. Yeah, that's something to really consider as you're going through this. Be aware context wise as well as you're bringing it in, the communications between them, between the entities, between the data, between the application use cases. This, as you're building this out, that also has to play into what the availability and uptime requirements are for these applications.
All right, so we're gonna push through some of this networking, because this is something that you've seen some of these components. Now we're building on top of each other. We have multiple public and private subnets that we've documented in here. We have security lists on each one of these subnets, and then I'm completely changing up. Let's talk about the application layer and data flow. So we still have a little bit of the data flow going on for the application layer, but it's not going to be as clear in some components. Now we're isolating down to strictly the compartment C, which is going to have a file storage, domain controller, Bastion server, print server, and Bastion for Windows. So these are something that, where are these stored? Where are these hosted? And then what's the connection? So we still have maybe this is a local peer gateway, and we're kind of building on this, the data flow between instances in the FTP environment and compartment C. So we have compartment C here and compartment A, and then servers are grouped and provisioned for a B2B portal. So we have a customer-facing piece to this. And so it's something that documenting that and noting that is like, there's a reason this is in compartment A. We don't want to interact with this, and this is our production environment where customers are coming in through.
Yeah, and this goes back to what we started with, the whole idea of the blueprints. This is the same application. This is the same use case that we were looking at previous. It's just a different schematic from a different point of view. Now we're looking at it from the application standpoint and access. Underneath this is still that architecture, that network that we just discussed, and it's still the locations of these resources are in those resources or those constructs that we built prior. Now we're looking at it from the application. Your developers and your security team are going to be looking at this on how to build the inner compartment relationships between these resources as you build them out.
Yep. All right. More components that we need to add for our application layer. And this is something that you're starting to see these layer on top of each other. Now, I wouldn't say you have to be as granular as we're being in describing this. You could have it just take these components here, move it over, and have all of it in one schematic for the application and data flow. But you'll notice now we have components that are backing up to object storage, and we're documenting which items are actually backing up to object storage. So that's the other piece. So, when we look at this entire application stack, everything that's going on, the networking team knows, and the architect of the overall application is like, okay, I need to go talk to these people about this issue. And then we can start using this for troubleshooting as well. because we can say, okay, what's going on? Where's it at? What's our architecture look like? And then we can start asking those questions of, why is this happening? What are the issues we're experiencing as we go down these particular architectures? And we know, okay, we're using an internet gateway. Is there an issue there? No, we can rule that out. Are we having scaling issues because we're using auto scaling, or maybe we're not auto scaling because we're using Apex, or we're using other components here, and it's no, it's not an issue there. We can start ruling out some components depending on if they're managed services, or and go through that process. And Jeremy, you have more of a background on developing, so any points in this architecture that you're like, hey, we need to add some pieces, because I may have missed some stuff when I designed this, but for a developer, what do you want to see?
Yeah, a lot of looking at this compartment level, and even looking at some cloud native services that would be in place here that you would want to consider is things like secret management. If you're using a managed service within OCI, or even if you're using a deployed secrets manager like Console or something of that nature, that communication is going to happen even in between these servers, across networks, and even across compartments. That interaction needs to be regulated and described in a reference architecture. Something else that in a containerization environment, it's things like DNS and things like naming conventions needs to be described and regulated within this same documentation. Those are things that are often, I won't say forgotten, but overlooked when you start thinking this is a reference architecture that's going to be copied and pasted across several different organizations, perhaps, on how to deploy network topography, how to deploy resources within a cloud. Those are things that you need to be called out and identified, so that something goes wrong or something needs to be troubleshooted, or you start looking at dependency management. Those need to be identified and documented.
Yeah. We have one question on what we're kind of talking about here so understanding, what's the context of putting data flow in compartment view? Should that not be in the VCN network view? And I from the way I designed this, I think it should be in both locations, mainly in the VCN and network view, like you're talking about and what we kind of showed. But I think from an application, and when we get into this piece, we're not getting into the here's a CIDR block, but we're getting into here's where traffic's coming in. What is it going to hit as the front end? And I think from a reference, when I'm building out something, I like having that view, but I think it's very much when I send it over to the application or developers, and Jeremy, please chime in if I'm wrong in this statement, but it's nice to see, okay, user traffic's coming in through here, so this is what I'm concerned about. Or this is back-end traffic of people being able to go into the system and grab what they need to out of the system for an order or something like that. So I think it's nice to have a high-level view of where is the traffic coming in.
Yeah, and I think it's a good question and a good thing to address here, because when you think of data flow, it's more of a something like a managed service. So when it's a cloud problem, it's not something you traditionally see on-prem, and it sits in that gray area between, okay, it's a resource that sits on my network versus a construct that's within my provider's purview of management. So it's technically within a compartment. It interfaces with data and permissions that are managed at the compartment level. And so, yes, you said it needs to be in both. It needs to know what routes and what resources it's where it's residing in the infrastructure, but it also needs to know what permissions and what access, what organizational structure, and like I said, within the managed service realm, it sits again at that kind of elevated that in between layer between, okay, it's a fully managed resource that's sitting on my network and a fully managed service that I interface with an API. So yes, the answer is both, I would say.
Yeah. All right, real quick before we dive into the next one. So the other question, do we have a view that shows both network and compartments, so both in single view, or is that become a too complicated diagram? I'm trying to remember through all of my slides here. I don't think it's too complicated of a diagram because you're just grouping the compartments around your inside of your ADs as you see here. So it's just a matter of when you start getting into region diagrams that we'll show you in a little bit here, that's where it can get a little bit complicated. When you're looking at this particular structure right here, it's not overly complicated to put your networking inside of the compartment, but it's just a matter of how much services you're using, and that's where I can say, yeah, it can get a little complicated. You may have to break it down as this one, we're talking about compartment A, and then we get into another slide that talks about compartment B and how those link up. It's just a matter of how many services are going to be implemented in that particular diagram to dictate if it's going to be overwhelming and you're like, what's going on here? So that would be my piece on it. I think for ours, we kind of broke it out with compartments and then the components in the compartments. And then you have drilled in views and then you zoom out and I would put a note at the bottom saying, hey, this is a 10,000 foot view of it. And if you want further views, then it goes into the subsequent breakdowns below that. So you have the high level networking inside the compartments and it's the subsequent views. All right, so Jeremy, any thoughts? Any items to add on?
That's good. That answer, I think that answered it really well.
But yeah, kind of continuing on the application and data flow, we do have a couple more networking components that we've added into this view, including the load balancers in this, and the fact that they're going to multiple backend servers. So there are a couple components that I would put in each one of these just so that people are aware of what's happening, where it's going. All right, security layer. There's a lot going in to this one, and this is, I would say that there's multiple different ways to actually do the security layer when you get into the architecture. And this one, I have the services here, but we have key management, we have WAF, we have DDoS protection, we have identity and access management. Now, these are here, but there would be notes as to what's going on, because when we're talking about security layer, it's not entirely, it's a mix. It's more of a document than really a architecture to a point. It's saying that we're using this service, but key management, are we using it for something that the user is coming in with, or are we using it for something that is on-prem for the customer coming in? What's going on with the key management? WAF, where is the WAF sitting? This is something that we can actually put in the architecture and put in kind of our data flow diagram of, all right, customers coming through WAF and then going into our internet gateway. And what are we implementing with our WAF? So the policies and some of those would be documented at a somewhat high level of saying, hey, we're using bot detection, we're using some of these other components. DDoS protection, this is something that when you're getting into cloud is kind of a native built into our platform, but it's just a matter of, are you implementing something on top of the DDoS protection that is provided by our cloud? And this is where, when you look at your architectures, you may be referencing what our security white paper talks about for what is provided. So when you look at services, you're like, oh, I don't have to write up anything. I just grab the snippet of what Oracle is actually providing us. So we're aware when we have to do a security review of, okay, these are the features that are implemented, and this is what Oracle is providing us by native capabilities.
Yeah, and actually, given that current question, this is as close to, I say as close to, this is a good representation of having both that kind of compartment resource view as well as a network view. And this is, you mentioned the managed services that need to be called out in here and how they interface with it. what I would suggest, and what a lot of times goes along with these reference architectures, is almost a narrative piece that describes not just, like Larry was saying earlier, with security list and those type of things, but what security policies and procedures are in place, even within the software that's running within these subnets. So if you have firewall rules, or if you have routing rules that need to be called out explicitly for security, segmentation, data segmentation, things of that nature, this is where you would need to document those and attach that and evaluate that here as well.
Yep. All right, so we got our security components. Now, the next portion of this is if we're doing multiple regions. This is where, I was kind of discussing from the network side. It can get very complicated when you have multiple networks deployed. And how do we actually show these? This is going to be a high level. Then you would have drill downs of potentially each region. Now, if it's replicated, if they're exactly the same as you see here, this would be something that we drill down into one region, and we have that reference, and then just say region 2 is this with this CIDR block or these components. So as long as it's exactly the same copy, you don't have to drill into it as much. You just have to have a reference of, oh, this is hosted in Phoenix region, and this other one's hosted in Virginia, and this is the key store we're using on both, this security we're using on both. And then we just show what's actually being connected between both. So from customer data center, we're going to show, fast connect and then VPN. And then we have a connection between both regions. We have VPNs that we're potentially using for other vendors. And then we have, in some cases, this is where we can get into how our security layer, our WAF, where are we deploying our WAF, where are we deploying some of our tools like Data Guard. And then if we're using a remote peering gateway, this is going to be something that's going over Oracle's backbone to do the RPG. And this is going to link up to this VCN here once we actually connect a DRG, basically. So, Jeremy, any other items to add on that one?
No, just the only thing is that reapplying kind of what we talked about earlier in the series is when you talk about things like DR, when you talk about things like high availability that will cross regions in a lot of cases, it goes to exactly why these reference architectures need to be in place, so that as you're building out both sides of this, so that as you're building out DR, as you're building out your multiple instances, whether it's QA or development or things like that, you can refer back to a state that is common among all of them, so that it's documented and auditable and repeatable. And again, is can go through a center of excellence or an approval process, and then so that if you have employee turnover, or if you have a migration of sorts to multiple data centers, or if you're scaling out, you can reference these things. Like I said, so you don't have to drill down. You know that these things exist. When you see, okay, we're going to build out availability domain, another availability domain for high availability, you know what the network topography should look like already. You already know what the application layout's going to be and what security stances need to be had before you even start building out, because you've already done that work on the front end.
Definitely makes it easier for building out your Terraform and other scripts. This also is going to have multiple components. So since we have a little bit more room, we can show our security layer a little bit, our data flow layer a little bit, and then drill down to it. All right. So we're going to hop into the two links that we have, but just want to show you, a couple of things. This is something that you can actually download. I'm going to show you where you can actually download the icons and how you can kind of make this stay the same and kind of get that reference architecture. So we have some recommendations from our side and kind of best practices for implementing it, but we also have a slide deck that you can download So you can build out your reference architectures as well, and what the connections look like for flow. And here's kind of just a sample diagram. So this is another way to do if you have a region and you're deployed in multiple ADs in that region. It's just a matter of how much space. Just shrink it down a little bit more so you can put more components in there, so you know what is going on for everything in that architecture. There's a lot of different icons. I'm going to breeze through these so we can get into the online side of it. We have compute, networking, governance, observability, security, API services. All of these can be grabbed so you can actually build out your reference architectures. So let's open up these sites. The first one, let me share this piece. So the first one is built and deployed. So this is where we have, and I actually have another tutorial for kind of building it out, but this is where you can download templates, and you can actually work with us. So this is why I wanted to bring this up, is this is great to see some of the other reference architectures, and you can download reference architectures from other places of what they've built out. You can deploy the Terraform for these particular architectures as well. So this is a good location for saying, oh, we want to see this reference architecture. So, runs a cloud native machine learning analytics application on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure using container engine for Kubernetes. So we see the Kubernetes workload, we see the load balancer, but all this stuff is done from you can see the reference architecture. In this case, this one may not have a Terraform. Some of them do that are on the videos here. And then the other place is also our Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Center. So you'll see some of the link ups to the built and deployed series here. And this is where we have Stream IoT data to Oracle Autonomous Database. So let's view this architecture. And we can take a look at some of the other ones. These, automation available, you can deploy this to Oracle. So when I click deploy to Oracle Cloud, it's going to have me log in. There's going to be a Terraform template for deploying this, or I can go to GitHub and actually grab this particular Terraform and take a look at what's going on. So it has your compute layer and everything for the Terraform files for deploying that particular reference architecture. All right, Jeremy, your any items you wanna bring up here on these reference architectures?
No, again, kind of what I mentioned earlier is these are meant for guidance as well as kind of demo usage, and then take what we've gone over today and apply, and then use those key steps to apply these to yourself, so that don't copy and paste anything and throw it in production. But in using these, there's a lot of steps that are very useful. Like Larry was mentioned, you can look on GitHub and clone it yourself, make the tweaks and changes to make it your own. There's the ability to use our resource manager to actually manage and deploy the state of the resources that are built out. So you can test and demo these reference architectures, see how they work, and then clean up right after. The question earlier about are there Terraform templates to build out reference architectures? Yes, and this is where you go to get them. The Architecture Center. Most of these have been updated to use Terraform that plugs directly in to our Architecture Center. Our resource manager, so that you can make updates and changes and have kind of a workflow so that you can progress and grow and scale the reference architecture to fit the need that you're trying to meet. And so it's very useful. It's constantly being updated, constantly being added to. So it's a great resource, not just as you're learning the OCI cloud, but also if you're wanting to venture out a bit more, use serverless or containers, or see some managed services that you just want to explore. A great resource for that.
All right, we got a couple of questions here. So is there any way besides Network Visualizer to produce an architecture diagram like what we're showing from the existing deployments? Yes, there is. And Jeremy, you might remember the name of the tool, but it's basically taking your Terraform and it looks at the Terraform and can build it from that. I will have to find that link and I will get it to you all after this, but it's a way to drag and drop the icons, and it builds your Terraform as you're dragging and dropping the icons. So it can do basically both, or you can inspect a current compartment and kind of build out and then move things around and kind of give you that network, that diagram. So there is a way to do that. I would say from how clear these are mainly done from either tools like, I think it's Diagram, it used to be draw.io, but I think they've changed the name, or PowerPoint or something like that, but there is a tool that can do that. So I'll get that to you all. The next question we have here, and Jeremy, do you remember the name of that tool? That
I don't. I was looking for it to see, but I know there's several out there that are good resources, and I want to say I think we're working on one internally that goes along with our resource manager as well. It's a graphical modeler for this. I don't think it's released yet, but it is something that I know we're working on being able to meet that need, because it's something that we've had several customers ask for.
Yeah, well, so there is one that is published. You just have to launch a instance, and then it can inspect it. So I know we do have one published out there, so I'll get that to everybody. So connecting via DRG with remote peering, are there any limitations where one region is using old DRG, not yet upgraded to a new DRG in another region, upgraded to the latest DRG version? I am not sure. Jeremy, do you know of any limitations on that one?
I don't think there are. I would have to go back and test, because I know the major upgrade for the new DRG was the ability to do the multiple to build out its own hub and spoke, to have multiple fast connects connected to it, and also have multiple the peering connections, so that multiple peering connections can share that same direct connect. I don't know of any limitations that would limit the connection between the DRGs, but I'd have to take a look at that to see if there are.
Yeah, I would too. And then final one, how do we show third-party tools like CyberArk or CrowdStrike in architectural diagrams? Most of the time, so this is why I kind of leave this one here. So this has a non-web logic node pool, and it's got Nginx and it's got Jenkins. So it's mainly just grabbing those icons from those particular third-party vendors. Some vendors have them. If they don't have something, then I would just put a note or grab an icon that's very similar and then just document it and say, hey, this is what it's for. But for the most part, I think most of those vendors have an icon that you can use, or just grab an image from that company. That's what I've used in the past in my architectures, is if they don't have an icon palette, I grab their particular logo and then I put it in the particular diagram. So, but that is reference architectures, building them and then grabbing them from here, and the recommendations. This is something that you would document out. What's actually going on, considerations. This is something that you can see here. What are the considerations, and then how to deploy. So this one here is going to take you to deploying WebLogic servers. So there's a lot of different parts to these sites that you can kind of drill into. And one of the ones I just noticed here, best practice framework for Oracle Cloud infrastructure using WebLogic, Oracle WebLogic side. So that said, Jeremy, thanks for the conversation today.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And yeah, and something so to answer that DRG question, just because it was bothering me, it looks like as long as the DRG is in the same tenancy, it can be peered. That was one of the updates in the V2. We do have a good step-by-step upgrade procedure for upgrading your legacy DRG to a new V2. So that if that's an option for you, if you can build that out, we have guidelines and suggestions for how to do that in place as well. So to answer that question, but no, this was good. I hope this was helpful. I hope this showed what kind of that proper step, taking what we've talked about before regarding best practices, regarding going through the whole idea of compartments, VCNs, network topography, things like that, and applying it at scale, and then applying it in an enterprise process where you want to build out the documentation, make it shareable, make it audible, make it repeatable, and then how we assist with that with our architecture center. And if there's any questions that come from that on how to get access to that, you can let us know or contact your sales team or your CPR or your cloud architect, and they'll be able to help you as well.
All good information. Thanks, Jeremy. Kenna, we will hand it back to you. Thanks for letting us talk today.
Yeah, thank you both. We do have a final poll up, so if anybody would like to give some feedback on the session, we always love to hear that, if you wouldn't mind. And yeah, big thanks to Larry and Jeremy for sharing this walkthrough, talking about the Reference Architecture Center and the resources we have available. And we hope to see you back next week for the conclusion in this particular series. But as Larry noted, there will be more coming. So we look forward to that as well. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.